Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live quickly shifted from a routine celebrity interview into one of the most intense cultural conversations seen on late-night television, when actress and activist Emma Watson stood up and walked off the set. From the moment Emma Watson stepped onto the brightly lit stage, something in the air felt off. The applause was warm, but not just out of admiration. It carried curiosity. People didn't know what to expect. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, with her hair pulled back and an expression somewhere between grace and steel, she didn't carry the energy of a movie promotion. She carried a message. Jimmy Kimmel, smiling as always, extended his hand with practiced charm. "Ladies and gentlemen, the brilliant, the beautiful, the bold, Emma Watson!" The crowd erupted. Emma smiled politely and offered a gracious nod, but her posture remained poised, reserved, more diplomat than actress. They eased into familiar waters. Her latest independent film, a few behind-the-scenes stories, and a gentle laugh about her well-documented clumsiness on set. She played along with the rhythm, but her eyes never lost their focus. Then, like a shift in wind, Kimmel pivoted. "You know, Emma, you've been in this industry since you were practically a child. You've seen how it's changed, especially with how we handle controversy now. I mean, what do you really think about cancel culture?" The words hung in the air, and Emma didn't flinch. But something shifted in her gaze. She adjusted her seating, crossed her legs deliberately, and folded her hands in her lap. "Could you clarify what you mean by cancel culture, Jimmy?" she asked gently but firmly. The game had officially changed. "Emma, you learned this from a young age. You've seen how Hollywood has changed over the years. So now, what do you think of the way we deal with controversial figures?" Emma turned to Jimmy, her expression elegant but measured. Her eyes remained fixed for a moment, staring directly at him. "What exactly does deal with mean here?" she asked softly but clearly, as if she were using an X-ray to analyze the sentence before her. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, his smile a little more calculated now. "You know, in recent years, some actors have faced serious consequences for things they've said or done in the past. Some see it as justice, while others call it cancel culture. You're someone who's been outspoken about your political views. Do you ever worry about being misunderstood or having your career jeopardized?" A silence fell over the studio after the question, a very brief but profound silence. The laughter stopped. Emma's expression remained unchanged, but her gaze hardened. She clasped her hands lightly in her lap. "Emma, being afraid to stand up for what's right, isn't that the real danger?" A brief pause. "My concern isn't being misunderstood, it's being misunderstood altogether." Kimmel flinched a little but continued. "So, do you think it's unfair that some people are punished? Sometimes it's not just ideas, it's serious accusations." Emma bowed her head, then made direct eye contact. "Emma, look, Jimmy, let's be clear before we get off topic. If there are serious crimes, the way to go is through prosecution, not lynching. But if someone said something thoughtless years ago, should the price be lifelong ostracism? I'm talking about principles here." Kimmel leaned back as if suddenly realizing the gravity of the matter. The audience was no longer laughing. The silence was almost physical. A few people in the crowd shifted. The tension was palpably mounting. Emma continued, her voice still calm but now filled with steely resolve. "Emma, cleaning out errors is one thing, destroying people en masse is another. If freedom of expression only covers ideas we like, it's not freedom, it's censorship." Kimmel leaned forward from his seat. "But Emma, shouldn't people in positions of influence, actors, artists, figures like you, be careful what they say, especially on sensitive topics?" Emma tilted her head slightly. She looked at Kimmel as if a student were examining an exam question. "Of course, being careful is important," she said slowly. "But there's a fine line between being careful and self-censorship. And who draws that line, Jimmy?" Kimmel tensed a little. It wasn't an answer she'd expected. "What do you mean?" "Emma, what do we mean by be careful? Is it the angriest group on Twitter setting the boundaries? Or brands in a boardroom deciding what's acceptable and what's not? Or a talk show host?" His voice was still gentle, but there was a thorn in the end of his words. Kimmel's smile this time wasn't genuine, but a defensive reflex. So, do you think people shouldn't take any responsibility for what they say? Some people have said seriously damaging, discriminatory things. Isn't it a bit naive to not expect consequences? Emma, plain and steady. I advocate for accountability, Jimmy, but who is that accountability to? The algorithm, the daily agenda, or an anonymous crowd who don't even know us but wave an ethical flag? The tension in the studio was palpable now. The cameramen focused their lenses more closely. The audience watched motionless. Emma paused for a moment and looked Kimmel straight in the eye. You say hate speech. It's a label that's unclear in its definition, but everyone readily slaps on. Is your definition the same as mine, Jimmy? Kimmel replied, his voice louder but a bit shaky. I think a reasonable person can easily understand what constitutes hate speech. I mean, we're not having a complex philosophical debate here. We're talking about basic humanity. Emma, her gaze softening and her voice lowering. Basic humanity. Yes, it's a very valuable concept. But sometimes it's so generalized that we even hide our intolerance of differing opinions under that veil. Another silence. This time Emma didn't speak. She was silent. She let the words find their own echo. Emma turned her head slightly to the side, then looked back at Kimmel. Basic humanity. Isn't that such a useful phrase? Her voice was still gentle, but the tone of her words was now icy cold. It's a wide enough roof that you can stuff whatever you want under it. The studio was completely silent. The audience had begun to feel less like television viewers and more like witnesses. This was no longer a dialogue between actor and host, but an ideological confrontation. Kimmel, sensing his position was slipping, tried to regain his composure. Look, I think we all agree that racism, sexism, hatred, these things are wrong. Figures who support them should face the consequences. This isn't a controversial view. This is Emma, slowly interrupting. Here we go again. Her gaze sharpened, but her voice remained silent. You define it, you frame the discussion, and then you declare anything outside that frame harmful. Kimmel's face began to redden. This was no longer just an intellectual debate. It was becoming an identity challenge. Kimmel, defensively, I'm not defining anything, Emma. I'm just saying certain actions have consequences. This is how society works. Emma, with a wry smile on her lips. Society? Which society, Jimmy? One shaped by social media algorithms? Or one whose ethical compass shifts based on the decisions of 3 sponsors? The cameramen had moved into closer focus now. The producers looked at each other behind the glass, but no one dared to intervene. Emma, continuing. Sometimes what you call society is just an echo chamber. Every voice left outside is labeled a problem. But real society thinks differently, lives differently, and not everyone lives in Malibu, Jimmy. Kimmel's smile had vanished. He wasn't acting anymore either. Kimmel, stiffening. That's truly ironic, it coming from someone who makes hundreds of millions of dollars and acts like an underdog. Maybe the problem is that the world no longer automatically respects your opinions. Emma's gaze sharpened. Without looking away, she replied, Emma, respect is earned, not insults. And no, I don't claim to be the underdog. But I know full well that I've been silenced for years because I've stood up for the silenced. Kimmel, angrily. If what we do is performance art, what is yours? Standing on stage and lecturing people on morality? Emma, with a clear, slow, steady gaze. I don't tell people what to think, but I remind them to think. Kimmel took a deep breath. I'm trying to have honest conversations about real issues here. Maybe this bothers you because you've been hiding behind fictional characters for years. The studio atmosphere suddenly became tense. A palpable electricity emanated. The audience remained still. The camera operators instinctively moved into close-up. Some audience members pulled out their cell phones, which the security guards immediately noticed, but no one wanted to miss the moment. Emma Watson slowly straightened. She sat up straighter in her chair, her eyes fixed on Kimmel. She smiled, but the smile wasn't warm. It was a silent challenge, hiding behind characters. You think so? Her voice was soft, but it cut through the studio like a knife. At least when I play a character, I make it clear it's a role, When I present a story to the audience, they know it's fiction. Kimmel leaned forward, his voice more raspy. What does that mean? Emma was silent for a moment. Then he listed the words one by one, hitting the mark. My point is this. You sit behind that desk every night, presenting yourself as a moral authority. But in reality, you're just a figure of entertainment, desperate for applause. You reduce the complexity of ideas to jokes. You breed polarization instead of genuine dialogue, because applause isn't as easily earned as empathy. Kimmel's voice cracked slightly. I'm not interrupting anyone. I don't support those who advocate hatred and discrimination. I'm simply saying that harmful ideas shouldn't go unchallenged. Emma put her hands on her knees. Her body was still, but her eyes burned like fire. There you go. You're back in the same boat. To you, anyone who disagrees with you is either a hater or a reactionary. Anyone who questions your methods is dangerous. It's a very useful tactic to shut down the debate, turn the other person into a monster. Time seemed to stand still in the studio. Breaths were held. The audience was captivated but also uncomfortable. This wasn't a talk show anymore. This was a television confrontation. Emma took a deep breath and continued. For you, dissent is a threat, but for me, it's a democracy itself, and if a woman's differing views bother you, maybe the problem isn't my opinions, but your habits. This wasn't just a clash of two people, but two worldviews. One spoke louder, the other wielded the power of silence. Kimmel stood as if his physical presence would offset his lost intellectual superiority. Sometimes, Emma, some people deserve to be portrayed as monsters. If someone espouses ideas that degrade and dehumanize a community, that person no longer deserves a polite debate. Emma stayed in her seat. She raised her eyes to Kimmel. Her mere glance shifted the tone of the stage. What about you? She asked softly. Who gave you the right to make that decision? When did talk show hosts become judges who decide which ideas live and which die? Kimmel's voice rose, but there was emptiness within him. We're not banning anyone, we're simply choosing not to bring hatred onto the platform. Emma narrowed her eyes and bowed her head. She laughed softly, but there was no warmth in that smile. What you call hate is sometimes just a different opinion, and what you call denial of platforming is silencing. Oppression, obedience, you don't care what anyone really thinks. You just want obedience. Kimmel's voice began to crack. Maybe the problem isn't cancel culture, Emma. Maybe the problem is that people like you can no longer rule the world as they please. When everything you say goes unanswered, you get irritated. Emma rose slowly. When she reached Kimmel's eye level, she didn't stand as tall as he did. She was softer, but more jarring. You say consequences, Jimmy. You love that word. But have you noticed? Those consequences are always applied to the same people. The same ideas are always declared harmful. The same voices are always silenced. Kimmel gestured angrily. I'm talking about human rights. Basic respect. If you can't understand that, don't lecture me about human rights. Emma's voice changed. He was no longer speaking from his heart, but from his lived experience. Don't tell me about human rights, Jimmy. I defended those words on the podium of the United Nations. I saw them in the field. I testified in the shelters. I read them in the eyes of girls seeking freedom. Your justice, which is limited to your Twitter feed, is like cotton candy next to that reality. The studio was breathless. Everyone knew what they were watching wasn't entertainment, but a moment of confrontation. Emma's voice was low, but every syllable was like cold steel. I've seen real oppression, real injustice, in the streets, in the courts, in the refugee camps. People were dying there when I stayed silent, Jimmy, and I didn't stay silent. The words hit Kimmel like a slap in the face. Her face was now flushed. The veins in her temples stood out. Performative activism, huh? Emma repeated, her voice low but with acerbic clarity. For me, this isn't just a platform, it's a mission. It's making space for those whose voices have been suppressed. This isn't yours to me, this is their voice. Kimmel pressed forward, his fragile pride adding edge to his voice. I'm using my platform against hatred and discrimination. I'm not staying silent. This isn't a fake act, this is courage. Emma's gaze was fixed. She wasn't judging anymore, she was simply explaining. You accuse me of silence, but true silence. You're out here caricaturing people for the sake of applause. Your humor ignores the real pain. My struggle continues even after the cameras are off. A moment of silence. Then Kimmel played his final card. Please, don't tell me those war stories, Emma. Just because you went to the UN to do activism doesn't make you a moral hero. You're just a rich, privileged Hollywood star. And now, when the world doesn't bow down to you, you're angry. That accusation spread like poison through the studio. Privileged Hollywood elite. Everyone waited for Emma's reaction to this blow. Emma didn't move. She didn't move at all. She locked her gaze into Kimmel's eyes. Interesting. Whenever a woman stands her ground, she's first called emotional, then privileged. When a woman is strong, she's either elite or indecisive. So, have you ever thought, Jimmy, why do we always carry these labels? Kimmel continued his attack. If those shoes fit, you wear them. You made millions of dollars. You were busy playing heroes. Real heroes suffer the consequences of the ideas you advocate. Emma's voice didn't rise again, but the fire within her now burned in her eyes. Millions of dollars? Maybe. But I earned that money through honest roles, not fake identities. And then I invested that money in the future of girls who don't have the right to an education. I worked for hope, not for ratings like you. At that moment, the studio froze. The cameras remained on Zoom. The producers couldn't intervene. Because that moment wasn't a program anymore. It was a true turning point. Kimmel's voice rose in accusation. Maybe it's time to acknowledge your privilege, Emma. Stop defending these people. This world is still divided because of them. Emma's fingers were clenched. Her body language wasn't tense, but a storm was swirling within her. Her voice, when it came out, was cold and crystal clear. Privilege? Come on, let's talk about that privilege. She took a deep breath. You sit behind this desk every night. You pass judgment on people you've never met. You shape lives with fabricated snippets. You silence them by making them look like jokes. And have we ever seen you pay a real price? No, because being on the right side is enough. Kimmel leaned across the table, his voice cracking. I pay the price every day. I receive death threats, boycott campaigns, harassing messages. You can't silence me. Emma tilted her head slightly. Her eyes weren't filled with surprise, but with profound disappointment. My people, this is the real Jimmy. His words weren't scathing, but they hit the bullseye. For you, everyone who opposes is one group, the enemy, the opposing front. You call different perspectives a threat, because for you, difference is a declaration of war. The studio was now a battleground. The audience neither applauded nor laughed. You could hear it if you took a breath. Kimmel's voice had become shrill, his control gone. Different perspectives? Is that what we call it now? Do you call racism, sexism, hateful rhetoric different perspectives? Emma walked slowly to the table but didn't approach. Her grip was mental, not physical. You use those words like a spell. You use racism, hate, discrimination to silence every argument. And people are afraid because those words aren't accusations, they're weapons. Kimmel's eyes narrowed. Maybe those labels are in place. Maybe no one should be able to hide behind fame and fortune anymore. Maybe those days are over. Emma's face remained unchanged, but her eyes dissected those words word by word. Your threat is clear, Jimmy. Don't think wrong or you will be silenced. But I will not bow to that fear. I will not fear your labels, your threats. Because I am not here to silence people, but to dare them to listen. Kimmel's lips moved, but no sound came out. Because in that moment, everyone understood. This wasn't an interview. This was a confrontation with the zeitgeist. Is that a threat, Jimmy? Are you trying to intimidate me on national television? Kimmel's face froze. He understood the gravity of his words, but he was powerless to back down. I'm just saying this. Words have consequences, and so do actions. Maybe it's time you learn that too. Emma laughed, but there was no joy in it. It wasn't a laugh, but an exposé. Am I supposed to learn from you what consequences are? As someone whose life's most dangerous thing has been telling jokes on air. Then he fell silent. And there was something in that silence, something far more powerful than a shout. The studio fell into such silence that everyone realized they were witnessing history. Kimmel played his final card. You know what, Emma? Our audience deserves to know what kind of person you really are, what values you stand for. Emma bowed her head slightly, then she looked him straight in the eye. Of course, Jimmy. Tell them. Tell them what you think I am. Kimmel's confidence wavered for a moment, but his ego didn't hold him back. I think you're so wrapped up in fame and fortune that you're completely disconnected from reality. To you, justice is only the pain you feel, because the pain of others doesn't affect you. You represent the corrupt legacy of that old Hollywood. The words echoed through the studio, falling like lead, each one heavy, aggressive, devastating. Emma remained silent for a moment. She kept her eyes on Kimmel, taking a breath. Then her words began to flow, slow, clear, jarring. Old Hollywood, he said quietly. A Hollywood that produced art, inspired dreams, connected people through stories. Is that what you're talking about? Or a system renowned for silencing women, oppressing minorities, and years of toxic silence? Kimmel's lips moved, but he couldn't answer. Emma stepped forward. Let me tell you, Jimmy, I am not old Hollywood. I am the voice rising from its ruins. I am the echo of the silenced actors, the silenced writers, the women who remain behind the scenes. I am the representative of those whose right to tell their stories has been denied for years. Every word in her voice was no longer just an individual plea, but a generational claim. Emma took a step closer. There was only silence between the stage and the table now. Kimmel averted his gaze, but Emma's voice dominated the studio where she had settled. Old Hollywood, she repeated. That Hollywood created the foundation on which you stand today. That platform laid the foundation for the values you are now trying to destroy. The studio was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Emma's voice remained silent, but every word rose from the ground and struck directly into the hearts of the people. Old Hollywood gave me a responsibility not only in front of the camera but also behind it. It taught me this: entertaining people is a privilege, not a right. And that privilege is used to bring people together, not to label them. Before Kimmel could respond, Emma continued, You asked me what kind of person I am, didn't you, Jimmy? She took another step. Now she was speaking not just to the millions in the studio, but to the millions on screen. I am someone who has built my career to be worthy of the trust of my audience. I am someone who tells real stories without succumbing to false populism. I am someone who has the openness to listen with honor even to those who disagree with me. Kimmel tried to get a sentence across. Emma, look, Emma's gaze settled. I'm not finished yet. Her words were neither a shout nor a rebuke, but the weight they carried shifted the entire atmosphere of a room. You want to know what kind of person I am, don't you, Jimmy? I am someone who can rise without tearing others down. I am someone who can stand alongside differing opinions without declaring them enemies. I am someone who knows that true strength lies in listening, not silencing. Some in the studio audience began to wipe away tears. Emma's voice trailed off, but its impact was amplified. And should I tell you the real difference between you and me, Jimmy? The cameras focused on Emma. His gaze was fixed on a single point. When this conversation is over, I'll go home. I'll lay my head on the pillow and sleep peacefully, because I've lived my life with honor. Can you say the same? Kimmel opened his mouth, but no words came out. His gaze averted, his voice caught in his throat. Emma Watson straightened the collar of her jacket. With a graceful gesture, she completed her pose. You know, Jimmy, I came here tonight to promote a movie. Emma turned her gaze to the audience. Her voice remained steady, but it reached the back rows. Tonight, I came to introduce you to a film. She paused. She took a deep breath. Her eyes were bright but resentful. But instead, a dark window opened onto the soul of modern entertainment. And frankly, what I saw worried me. The studio was silent. Today, disagreement is confused with lynching. Asking a question is treated like a crime. Those who shout the loudest get the loudest applause. But those who think the loudest are silenced. The audience couldn't take their eyes off her. This wasn't a script, but a stark reality. Thank you for coming to see me, but I apologize for witnessing such a painful moment of rupture. You came here to laugh, to think, to be inspired, not to fight. She turned to Kimmel one last time. Her voice held a hurt gentleness. Jimmy, I hope one day you learn the difference between holding someone accountable and destroying them. I hope one day you realize that true courage wasn't about humiliating someone weak, but about admitting you're wrong. And then Emma turned slowly. She began to walk, pressing into silence. Each step echoed through the studio like the closing note of an era. Kimmel's voice finally echoed, almost pleading, Emma, wait, we can fix this. Emma paused. She looked back, that familiar, polite yet firm expression on her face. No, Jimmy, we can't fix it, because fixing requires listening first, and you've forgotten how to listen. Then she disappeared from the stage. Kimmel stood petrified behind his desk. His mouth opened several times, but no words came out. The persona he'd constructed crumbled before his eyes. The audience fell silent at first. Then murmurs began. Whispers, then a murmur. When they realized what they were watching, they knew an era had ended. The footage, filmed on phones, leaked despite all security warnings. Within hours, it took the internet by storm. Within days, Jimmy Kimmel's ratings plummeted. And people began to ask, when did a variety show become a weapon? How did a showdown become a means to annihilation? The events of that night ignited a nationwide debate. What is the role of an artist? What is the difference between holding someone accountable and lynching someone? For Emma Watson, this moment was the clearest expression of the values she has represented in years. It was the stance of a career, a character, and a woman. For Jimmy Kimmel, it was a painful lesson in the difference between power and respect. As the studio lights slowly dimmed, the crowd filed out, and everyone felt the same. This was a moment in history that Hollywood would not celebrate. But that was precisely what would not be forgotten.